to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where we sit down with people who give shape, texture, and voice to the stories that matter here on the North Fork, and sometimes far beyond. Some of our guests are rooted here by generations, others join us from elsewhere to share their work, their perspective, or their connection to the community, but all bring something that resonates, something that adds to the ongoing conversation. We talk about what's changing, what's worth holding on to, and the currents of history, both quiet and loud, that run through this place. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 203, we sit down with Jacob Cooper, a licensed therapist and author of Life After Breath and the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. Jacob's interest in the mind, healing, and human resilience began after a major childhood experience that shaped the direction of his life and career. His professional work brings together traditional psychotherapy with practices like mindfulness and Reiki, depending on what each client is comfortable with. Through his writing and teaching, he explores themes of grief, anxiety, and personal growth, and how people can find stability and meaning during difficult times. In this conversation, we talk about his journey, his approach to helping others, and what he's learned from working with people in a wide range of settings, as well as his connection to Greenport. So I hope you enjoy episode 203 with Jacob Cooper. This episode was recorded June 23rd, 2025. Thank you so much for coming on the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. I'm really looking forward to talking to you today.
Likewise, yeah, this is going to be fun.
Thank you. And maybe just before we get into some of the questions, if you wanted to give just a little background about yourself, maybe where you were born and raised.
Sure. Well, I'm a fellow Long Islander, and I was raised, in Nassau County, right next to Hempstead, Long Island, in a town called West Hempstead. Very original, and its town's name. But born and raised here. A little bit about myself beyond that is in Long Island, at the age of 3 years old, I had a profound near-death experience when I was just the young age of 3 years old, which I was due to contracting pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough, which led to complete deprivation of oxygen, suffocation. I was totally out, and then I was able to have a profound realization of the other realms. Some would call that heaven, the other side, the soul's awareness beyond the body, but certainly is very mystical and eye-opening that there is life beyond the body, that, the body may go, but there's a part of us that goes on. And I had that firsthand, clear understanding and knowing of this realization at a young age. And that changed the trajectory of my life to the work that I do today, where I work in really sharing, my books, this profound message, because, a lot of people, they just get dropped in the body, and some people gravitate to religion or other types of theories, but a lot of people have a lot of fears or questions, towards death, as we've been very much conditioned in much of our culture to fear that part. And hopefully my work will not only allow people to embrace, that part of life, but also to really embrace that embrace what they have in front of them, most importantly, too.
And could you walk us through a little bit more when you had that near-death experience at a very young age and what happened and how it shaped your life moving forward?
Yeah, I went to a playground with family, friends, climbed up to a ladder on a slide, and I just began to totally suffocate as a result of whooping cough. All parts of my body began to shut down due to the deprivation of oxygen. And then I felt my brain totally deprived of oxygen. I felt this incredibly loud crack within my brain. And once that happened, I felt my soul just soar out of my body, go through the tunnel and really cross over to what I refer to as the other side, in which I had a profound mystical experience that encountered what, is referred to as guardian angels. These are angelic figures that are always with us before we were born, and they're going to continue with us after. They guide us. They're primarily assigned to us before we do get here. And there was a male and female guide or guard or spirit guide or guardian angel, as some may call it. I was able to become aware of also tons of angels in front of me. I was aware of creative life force, which all of life emanates from. Some associate the terminology of God or the centerpiece of the universe or the divine. Um, Aware of people that were I was with throughout lifetimes, otherwise known as a soul pod or a soul cluster or soul family that were with me in my NDE. And then I just became aware of previous lifetimes that I've lived and a little bit understanding of why I'm here in this body and continuing this life. In other words, a little bit of the life's purpose was able to be shown to me in the premonitions that I saw in the work that I would be doing in terms of public speaking and sharing this beautiful message to people to just be a gentle reminder that you didn't fall out of a tree. You came from
Mhm.
a divine place. You're going to be going there, and it's important to really always, try to stay connected. And I think that's how we could really elevate and change the planet by just simply remembering who we are allows us to remember remembering who you are allows people to remember who we are in a better
Mhm.
way. The
Yes.
interconnectivity that people had. And so, I chose to stay, which is very rare for a lot of near-death experiencers. Most near-death experiencers are told that it's not your time or there's more work to be done. But I agreed, to stay to really, give over this message, to support other people, and to just make people's lives, a little bit more connected in any way that
Mhm.
I could. And that's a little bit of the NDE, but obviously in two of my books, it's a lot more elaborated. And, how it changed me is just the clear understanding that, at times life could feel very much like random chaos. So there's no justification for the bad things in life. But this told me that there is an order of things. And sometimes through the human eyes, it doesn't make sense. But, life is very much, I view God to me as the acronym of a guiding organized design that to me there was symmetry, there was purpose for our lives, and we're all here for a unique reason to elevate the world in front of us.
And I was curious because you that was at a very young age, but moving forward through middle school and high school, and even after high school, when did you realize you wanted to turn your personal journey into a professional one, helping others through therapy and spiritual guidance?
Yeah, I mean, for most of my childhood and you know, adolescent life, it felt more of a burden than a blessing for certain. As when you're a kid, what are most kids prescribed to do is just to be normal. And here I was experiencing the ultimate paranormal experience, and so I felt very much disconnected. But in order to survive, I had to just compromise that experience. Doesn't mean that I forgot about it, but I had to just kind of bog down my energy to fit in with the other kids, as ultimately, for continuity in this life, we need adaptability. I think that's the most significant point of references. Darwin certainly references. Um, but for a while, like I said, it was like a beach ball that I really tried to put down in the water for as long as I could. And then eventually it just kept on coming up to the surface. You know, when you have a near-death experience, oftentimes it changes people. You know, People reevaluate their lives, but a big byproduct of a near-death experience is intuition. And so as a kid, I would often have these premonitions of events that would happen, see them, know them, and they would happen in front of me. And it felt quite frustrating and annoying, or I just wanted to live my life. But I would certainly say that pain and discomfort and all the anxiety that I had, probably my early college years, allowed me to reevaluate more existential questions and to take more ownership. And when I could remember one of the clearest points of when I was able to really own this experience is when I picked up a book called Embraced by the Light by a New York Times bestselling author named Betty Eadie that just allowed me to understand that other people had near-death experiences, that there was a term from it coined by my friend Dr. Moody, and that gave me a big relief in many regards that this wasn't something that just happened to me, that there was a term for this, that other people had it. Not only that, but it was a positive impact on other people's lives. And so um, I believe the Pablo Picasso quote that the meaning of life is to find your gift and the purpose of it is to give it away. And once I recognized that this was indeed a gift and not a burden, I recognized the functionality of it. The purpose of it was to share it to others. And I remembered that from the visions that I saw in my near-death experience.
Mhm. And in terms of just your practice today, how do you integrate traditional psychotherapy with more spiritual practice like Reiki, mindfulness, and past life regressions in your sessions?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think obviously we're trained as therapists to rule out, certain things, right? So when a client comes to your office, I'm not going to just jump, comes to my office rather, I'm not just going to jump to past life regression if a client has a phobia or a trauma or anxiety. But, so first thing that we do is, we would try to explore this, through a psychotherapeutic lens. But then there comes a point where that has a certain limited bandwidth because it's not addressing the point of origin of the pathology, perhaps. And that's where you have to really address this from other angles. It's like you could go to a primary care doctor and get, some stuff, but if you have, a virus or cancer or heart disease, you might need a more of a specialist or a different angle to really address what's going on. And so that's really where I find soul therapy as a big part of the therapy that I work, because the client that's sitting in front of you isn't just a summarization of the experiences that they've had in this lifetime in this body. There's bigger stories that couldn't be infiltrating themselves in this, into this life. And so some of these other modalities allow people to go to those point of origins behind their pathologies so that they could understand the whys, and that could impact the how and the what, which is very Viktor Frankl oriented if you're familiar with some of the logos therapy that he
Yes.
started. Um, and so I try to keep it eclectic and broad based because I understand that yes, we have a mind, we have a body, we have our emotions, but we also have a soul. And so I really try to incorporate, all of the different angles to address what's going on, in somebody's life. But certainly, traditional psychotherapy, a lot of the Eastern practices that really work on a deeper level of our being are really starting to be accepted and embraced, such as meditation, such as mindfulness, as it is doing the case in Western medicine as well. So I do like what I'm seeing where there's a nice hybrid mix of East and West that's going on, in the mental health sphere.
Yes. And just, I'm curious if you've had any cases or sometimes people might struggle with the idea of spirituality in a clinical setting. How do you meet clients where they are, especially those who may be skeptical?
Hmm. Yeah, that's exactly where I meet them. I think a big dichotomy of religion, spirituality is about self-empowerment to a degree. It's not information outside of yourself that someone is trying to preach, which, has turned off a lot of people in some of the dogmatic approaches that are held within the more the extreme forms of religious practice. But some people are able to have a beautiful expression of religion and it builds a sense of community. So I'm not knocking that certainly. And certainly I believe in having a balance. That could be great. I have beautiful Jewish roots that I honor, and that gives me a cultural connectivity, and it's just another avenue of connection that I have, another path up the mountain, so to speak. But I think it does people well when they have first a primary spiritual connection and then secondary, religion. And I think the problem that happens is when you have a primary religion and they don't have um, you don't have a spiritual connection to the self beyond the organized beliefs. But I certainly meet people where they're at. I don't preach anything. In fact, very little, unless the client is going to approach me about the work that I do, very rarely will I ever disclose the things that I do because I think what's most important is not myself, but the client. And I think self-disclosure is important, but in limited doses where it's relevant to what the client is going through. But I try to not make it much at all about myself unless a client is open, unless it's relevant, to the particular situation.
Okay. And then you had written your first book was Life After
Mhm.
Breath, which as you mentioned, shares power insights into your near-death experience. But just seeing that book come out, what surprised you the most about how people have responded to it?
Um, you know, I think that I would put a lot of these books that were probably ghostwritten in the New Age community, meaning they weren't even written by the big authors and on pedestals. And what people came up to me, I wrote this, obviously I had an editor, two editors of my books, but it was really the book was my work. I didn't have someone else write me the book, or wasn't interviewed in the hotel room for hours on end and paid someone $80,000 like a lot of these, people
Hmm.
actually do. And so I was scared. I was not a self-perceived good writer. I really struggled in writing throughout most of my life. In fact, I was put in the lowest level of non-accredited courses in a community college for reading and writing starting off. So I had a very low self-esteem and my abilities to actually, give us something of value. But people were telling me, as I said, I've read all the great books in spirituality, near-death experience literature, and your book spoke to me way more than the other books. And that's not something that I would ever think in a million years that I would
Hmm.
hear. And so I think what's important is a lot of people, they will put these other books on pedestals and their own experiences. They'll just say, who am I to do this? But if not you, then who? And what I've learned is it's not better or worse, that each person has an ability to reach a different audience, a different pocket. And it's just important to kind of own your energy, your branding, what you're about. And I'll be able to reach some people, but other authors will be able to reach different pockets. And it's all on, to me, a frequency match and a magnetism of the work that we do and who we are and how it could speak to other people. But I think everyone has a unique note, a unique song to sing, and everyone has a different audience. And just because your book isn't, selling millions of copies doesn't mean that it's a crappy book. It just means that it's meant to have a different frequency, a different audience. But if you could help out one reader in their lifetimes, that's what it's all about.
Hmm.
So, am I ever going to be a writer who sells millions of books? I'm opening up the door to that. I'm not going to say no,
Hmm.
but it doesn't mean that one life can't change the world because you never know where that one person goes and how that person impacts their surroundings and the ripple effect of that, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Yes. And then in your newest book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, what core message were you hoping to get across that you hadn't yet explored in your first book?
Yeah, I mean, for myself, I think that hmm, I think what I wanted people to understand is that spiritual transformative experiences and near-death experiences by themselves do not necessarily change you. What you learn with them and what you do with them can. And in my second book is more of that second part. The first book was that first part of that sentence, right? That it was about the story of it.
Hmm.
So it's no different than the work that I do as a therapist. Within our lifetimes, we all have experiences, we all have stories. That's great. But how do you define that story? That becomes your reality. That becomes your interpretation. And so this second book was the interpretation or the definition of the near-death experience that I had, most importantly, to empower people to not wait to die to have this awareness, hopefully how to live a more spiritual life. And, for people to not have to wait to see all these things to happen, that they could have these realizations. So it's very much a guidebook, very much a tool book, and allows people to understand that allegorical, symbolical reference of Jacob's ladder, of how people could really, in their own way, climb their own individualized rungs on the ladder to go higher, as I do believe the higher you go, the more you could actualize and understand and embody in this life.
Yes. And then you've often spoke about grief as a gateway, not just a burden. How can people begin to transform grief into growth even in their darkest moments?
hmm Yeah, it's a great question. Is the grief that we're talking about, particularly is usually when a loved one dies, as grief could be an ending of almost, anything and the emotional reaction that comes with it. I think for a lot of people, the loss of a loved one can be earth-shattering for many. It could be traumatic. It could be a tremendous shakeup in one's life. But what I find is there's a great dichotomy of painful experiences and reevaluating life or finding a newfound purpose. And I think ultimately the concept of death, much like a near-death experience, people look at finite endings of life with the loss of a loved one. And maybe for the first time, they're looking at that, they're contemplating that. And when they're able to look at that, there's something that does not resonate. There's just this voice inside of them that says, no, I know on one hand, yes, it is very valid that they're not here on the human part, but there's a part of me that really cannot accept that there is an ending because I'm love. What we had was love, and the love that we have cannot possibly end. It is eternal. And so I think it allows people perhaps an opportunity to reevaluate their, existential questions and how they view continuity of life. And so I think for a lot of people, it gets them on a quest because there's some part of themselves that cannot possibly accept that this is the end. And that, to me, is the voice of the soul that really is cracked open at times with really existential questions that come, from these incredibly shake-up and traumatic periods of loss that could happen in people's lives.
And I was just curious, was there, if you felt comfortable talking about it, was there a moment, even in your own life, that you felt like there was a moment where you were in a dark place and that you needed that, or like you had come out of that area of not just burden, but where you were going through something, struggling through something in high school or college?
hmm
Uh,
Yeah, several times. I point to again, the epiphanies that we have. I mean, certainly in my near-death experience, one of the epiphanies that I had was that I experienced my near-death experience, in a playground, in that
mhm,
allegorical, symbolical reference of a child in the playground of God, how that is our eternal home. And so epiphanies, like I said, themselves don't necessarily change our lives, but what we do with that changes us.
mm,
And so there was one point in time where literally I was asked to leave my home. I wasn't, I probably deserved it, was not behaving. And I walked around the corner of my house, subconsciously, and I found myself once again in the playground. And when I felt totally just dejected from this world, that I didn't have a home, that I just felt like a complete nomad, that playground in front of me was that reminder 2 decades later that no matter what I or anyone else goes through, no matter how disenfranchised you feel or how homeless you feel in this world or dejected, that there's always a love from a divine source. There's always a home of each and every one of us with the divine. That's where I do believe a big part of ourselves resides still. I think a part of us, maybe 10 to 50% of us are here in this body, but then we have this other part of ourselves that's always still over there. And that
Mm,
is the home. And we're trying to certainly make this life, the home, but it's really is a temporary dwelling place. And I view this life as just a temporary vacation. And so
mm,
I try to live my life as if I'm on vacation mode and I'm just a tourist of each day in each experience. But that was certainly life-changing. It was just a very comforting feeling. And again, what I did with that was I really decided to share that exact message as um, the near-death experience, yes, it was important for me to understand this individually, but then what do you do with that? Do you just hold on to
mm,
that, or do you allow that as a reference to relate to people and to give over to people? Because we all are intertwined and we all go through the same kind of moves on the chessboards, just different styles of it, and we all need to learn how to navigate the board, and I think with having good information and good connectivity, we could be more skillful in how we, move the board of life.
mm. And just looking at today's f fast-paced world,
hmm
what's one therapeutic tool or practice you find most effective for people dealing with anxiety or trauma today?
It's a very good question. Yeah, I mean, in a microwavable society, you do need microwavable moves that are quick. And a lot of people will think, oh my God, I need to sit in an ashram for 3 weeks in a row and just meditate and totally, isolate myself from everything. And while that can have its benefits, I've really tried to adapt a lot of different modalities that help people in what, we try to refer to as the quickening, that you don't have to have hours on end to have a spiritual ascension or a connection, that it could happen very just instantaneously. And so a lot of the work that I do is teaching clients self Reiki positions, which is really Reiki is a form of Japanese healing started by a man by Dr. Mikao Usui. Um, and Reiki is basically, if you break down the word, is it's Rei is universal and Chi is energy. So we all have an ability to connect to this energy that we have. Much like a cell phone needs to be charged, our own energy needs to be recharged.
Mm,
And through connecting to our own Reiki energy, our own electrical forces, we could really recharge. And so just having people, let's say, if they're feeling stressed, placing their hands on that one particular area could totally change their own physiology, really activate the vagus nerve, change their own neurochemistry, and allow them to be safe. I think the key is the safety, whether that's anxiety or trauma. What's needed is to provide safety. Because oftentimes what happens is people will project or they'll replay scary experiences on the projector screen of their lives that have nothing to do with this exact moment. And I think all of life is really a matter of interpretation. And people are finding through breath work, through practices like Reiki, brain, the neuroplasticity of the brain is, drastically altered. And more importantly, people are able to find a sense of presence and a sense of safety. For instance, um, when you watch a scary movie late at night, you go back to your bed. What happens is that bed that you're so accustomed to sleeping in all of a sudden is a scary place. Nothing changed. It's just right now we're holding on to this image on this projector screen that's causing us to really feel a sense of being afraid. And
mm,
when you're able to do breath work, it allows us to really negotiate with what's going on with compassion and empathy, and then redirect ourselves to find safety in this
mm,
moment and to find beauty in this moment and to be the observer of this moment and to not operate from a place of fear or being scared, but rather truly work with those feelings with compassion and to find ease and grace and flow in this moment. And so mindfulness is big, Reiki is big, even taking your fingertips and tapping a certain area, otherwise known as EFT.
Mhm.
All those things are great to change your neurophysiology and to really ground yourself and to really remove a lot of the stagnant energy. I think for people, we were not given a manual on how to self-regulate, and we're bombarded with so much information. It's so important for people to really learn how to regulate. Even something like taking a shower. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing it 5 times a day because that will probably dry out your skin. It'll
Mhm.
probably cause OCD, but taking a shower energetically, I say to people, like when you, and I do this myself, when I'm seeing, 7 or 8 clients a day, I'm taking on all of their electromagnetic frequencies and all of their stuff. I need to cleanse before I go to bed. Otherwise, I'll be up to 5 in the morning and having nightmares. So when I take
Mhm.
a shower, and for people listening, when you take a shower, don't just view it as something physical. Imagine there's white light coming out of that water onto your skin, cleansing all of the heaviness that you had throughout the day, and then just feeling that purification that happens. And tell me how you feel a little bit differently after that. So there's plenty of things. Drinking water, movement is big too. I'm a big proponent of neurohealth. When you're able to move, that increases blood flow in the brain, which allows depression to decrease, anxiety to decrease, your sleep is improved. So blood flow is very important. And just by simple moving or exercising, if you can, or if you can't move, tapping on your brain, try to get your water intake, reducing caffeine and, drinking caffeine, alcohol, drugs, all those stuff are just terrible for the brain. So I think allowing people to really understanding this from a holistic basis, but also understanding how brain health impacts mental health too, that it's
Mhm.
not a hard science, that the healthier your brain is, usually the happier you feel.
Yes. And then now just looking over your career, you've spoken and taught all over from libraries to wellness retreats. Is there one particular experience during these events that's really stuck out to you, or if you feel was really important?
I would say I think they all speak to me, but last year I went to Phoenix, and I presented in Phoenix, Arizona in August. So it was pretty hot over there. But I presented at a beautiful conference center, right in Phoenix, which, by the way, I do believe, not population-wise, but size-wise, is the biggest city in the U.S. And it's
Hmm.
very innovative as well. So it's Arizona's a wonderful place to visit and definitely a metaphysical hotbed with Sedona, and a lot of my spiritual friends and colleagues are all seem to be in Arizona, so it's like a second home to me. But I was at Phoenix at a conference with an organization called Helping Parents Heal, which was really started by two individuals who, had children who passed away. One of them is my friend Elizabeth Boisson. Her son was, yeah, I guess hiking, and he got into, you know, a little bit of a situation, and he crossed over when he was, I believe, climbing Mount Everest due to altitudes and all those kind of things. But she, in that moment, without anyone telling her, she felt her son giving her a big hug, and she had what's called a shared death experience in many ways, but she also knew that she was supposed to start this big organization. And then she got a reading with my friend Suzanne Wilson, who didn't know a thing about her, said, "Wow, you're going to start this really big organization that's going to be worldwide, that's going to help out so many people." And today, Helping Parents Heal is in nearly every single country. They have support groups for people who have lost loved ones that they don't view as pathology based. They call them shining light siblings or parents. And why they do that is through loss, they're able to find that the light that you have and the light that your loved one, has is always interconnected, and there's continuity. And so they bring on evidential mediums and therapists and different healers to really do a lot of conferences. They even have, several meetings throughout the week online. So any listener, tuning in, highly recommend checking them out. But when I did present there, there were over 1,200 people there. And, while on one hand you could say, oh my God, that's horrible that you had 1,200 um, people have lost loved ones. But, listen, I've been to a lot of places. I never saw happier people in my life. And sure, there's a dichotomy of grieving and mourning. At times, people will be going about their business and smiling, but there's still a deep grief that's not always shown to the public. So yes, that is true. But I was able to see that yes, uh, not only was is there life after our loved one's death, but people were able to find life after their death for themselves,
Mm,
and they were able to really seemingly find life together and just a joint camaraderie. So that was a big honor, and I was joined by people who are in every single library that you see in the metaphysical section, such as James von Prague, Dr. Mary Neal, to name a few. Anina Morjani was there, if you're familiar with some of these people, and they had just all said, "Hey, Jacob," and I'm like, I didn't know they know me. So that was a
mhm,
big honor, and people came up to me like, "Oh my God, you're a celebrity," and it's just funny to see how other people view you and how I just see myself as just a regular dude. But if
mhm,
I'm not chasing celebrity or fame, I'm going after something that will hopefully help out someone's life in their grief, and
mhm.
that's the only thing that I really could care about. The rest, I could care less about. It's just to me, it's like air. It's nothing. Um, so that was to me something that stuck out for certain. The Helping Parents Heal annual conference, and hopefully I'll get to be invited back next August as well too.
Yes. And just also looking at today, what does healing look like to you today, and what's a message you hope listeners walk away with, especially those navigating pain or searching for meaning today?
Yeah, I think to me, I think suffering is optional for people in their healing journey, that they don't have to suffer, that yes, there is still pain, but they're able to learn how to live with pain. I don't think anyone's immunized from painful experiences, in life, but I think there's a dichotomy of pain and suffering, and that is a part of the healing journey. A lot of people in suffering feels like they can't get out of it, and that's where healing needs to come in. So
Hmm.
healing honors and works through the pain and understand that, through our own ability to feel, we can heal. But it's not by dismissing, it's not by ignoring. When someone's grieving, that's a lifelong journey where pain may come into it, our lives. But it doesn't mean that it has to be something morose. It doesn't mean that it has to be something to shy away from. In fact, it could lead to more of a transformation, a sense of meaning, and a developed compassion for those in your path. And so I think
Mm,
part of the healing road isn't just love, light, and rainbows. It allows you also to be, present with your darkest of days and to be there and to show up regardless of, what's going on. And to me, healing isn't a point that you just reach at a destination and say, I am healed. It's each and every day you have an opportunity to provide healing, which is really just allowing your light to work through any bit of darkness that, comes up throughout, the moment in a way.
hmm. Yes. And I think I had just one other question. I think there you do have somewhat of a connection to, because we are based in
Hmm.
Greenport and on the North Fork. Could you talk a little bit about that? And because I think you mentioned your parents
Hmm.
have a place in Greenport. What maybe attracted them to the area, what they like about the
That's
area?
that's a wonderful question. Right now I'm even looking at a picture of my grandfather. He's on a boat. But essentially why I'm saying that is my grandfather was a big fisherman, still is. He comes through in mediumship readings and he's still in my backyard because I live on the water and he's on my
Okay.
dock fishing. So what you do over here, you're gonna continue to do, over there in many ways. The passion that you have here, you'll continue over there. My grandfather was a frequent to Mattatuck. He loved fishing out there. And Greenport was also a big spot that he would go and, meet up with people and go on his fishing trips. So, I think in the way, he really opened us up to that area. He taught us about it, and by going there, it allows us to feel even more connected to him.
Hmm.
But what I love about Greenport is, and not to knock other areas, is that it is, uh, I guess the word is, I suppose, pure and antiquated, and it's not, capitalistic and, influenced, and it just seems very, um, very pure and in its own. It's not like corporate America infiltrating itself in it. It just really holds on to its own. And I hope that it continues to do that. But just the energy of Greenport is very accepting, very creative, I find. People tend to be pretty warm, unless they're coming from the South Shore of no, but they tend to,
Yeah.
it's a little bit of a different vibe from where I'm at in
Hmm.
Massapequa, where, if you need something, people will drop everything, but they're not going to say hi and smile on you if you're on the road.
Hmm.
Greenport, there's more of a creative force, and you just definitely feel like you're transported out of Long Island. So to
Nice.
me, as much as I love Long Island, it's great because when you're there, you feel like you're transported out of it, like
Hmm.
you're in some place in New England or something
Yes.
like that. And it's great to go to. And obviously, I love the restaurant venues there, um, and just the energy that it has. It's very light, it's very warm, very inviting, and very creative.
Nice. Definitely. Um, no, but I think that was great. I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today and share your story and all the work you're doing. So it was really great to talk with you.
Thank you. Thank you. And if anyone is interested in contacting me, through individualized services, you can reach me at jacobLcooper.com. You can also look at my upcoming events. I'll be at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York in October. So that's very exciting with a bunch of other book signing events coming. And if you're interested in purchasing my books, they are available paper, Kindle, in audio. You could, look at that through my website, of course, through on Amazon and all places. And if you're interested in booking me for events or book signings, please do contact the website.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the good work you do.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 203 with Jacob Cooper. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.